Okay, this is our daily study of Pirkei Avot, the Mishnah Ethics of the Fathers, in honor of those who have yard site for both today and tonight, the 12th and 13th of Av. The yard sites for today: Irving Bernstein, Max Berg, Lawrence Klutz, and Yetta Goldstein and Lyubov Kapustin. And for tonight, Stanley Barish, Charles Gersh, Joseph Haith, Joseph Kars, Sarah Levy, and Ruth Unger. May their memory be for a blessing. A link to the text of the Mishnah will be in the first comment below. We're up to chapter 5, Mishnah number 17. Kol machlokas shehi l'shem shemayim sofa lehiskayim, v'she'ena l'shem shemayim ein sofa lehiskayim. Ezo hi machlokas shehi l'shem shemayim, zo machlokas Hillel v'Shammai, v'she'ena l'shem shemayim, zo machlokas Korach v'chol adaso. Okay, any dispute which is for the sake of heaven shall in the end be of lasting worth. And I like that translation, we'll get to that in a moment, of lasting worth. But that which is not for the sake of heaven shall not in the end be of lasting worth. Which dispute was for the sake of heaven? That of Hillel and Shammai. And which was not for the sake of heaven? That of Korach and all his company. Okay, so let's unpack this. What is for the sake of heaven? That means for the sake of godly ideals, meaning not for your own grandeur. So many fights that people have is for their own ego. But if you're doing it for a good matter of principle, for the principles which are eternal, the word lihit kayem actually means to endure. So all the commentaries point out it seems counterintuitive. If a dispute is for the sake of heaven, the dispute will endure. Well, is it good for a dispute to endure? Isn't it better for a dispute to be resolved? This is saying the opposite thing. When ego is involved, the dispute will be resolved. But it's actually a very subtle point. No, for a dispute to endure, meaning that both sides have lasting worth, is actually a good thing because it never gets resolved because both sides have a point. It's a classic rabbinic view. You're both right. And then someone says, how could they both be right? And the rabbi says, well, you're right too, right? If both sides are right, that means both sides have a good point, and it won't be resolved. But when a dispute is decidedly resolved, that means because one of the sides is just objectively wrong. So the example of that which is a good dispute is Hillel and Shammai, these two rabbis, these two sages. Hillel is generally lenient and more compassionate, and Shammai generally is stringent and rules on the side of strict justice. So Hillel is user friendly, so there's a rule that we rule like Hillel. We always go according to Hillel. However, we never buried Shammai's opinions and say his opinions are irrelevant. You can spend hours in yeshiva trying to analyze the view of Shammai, even though we don't rule like him in practice. We still respect his opinions and have to understand them in principle. And so the dispute just endures forever. And interestingly, the individuals, Hillel and Shammai, had very few disputes. It's really Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, their yeshivas that they established, the house of Hillel and the house of Shammai, their disputes sort of go on forever. And what's an example of dispute not for the sake of heaven? Korach and all of his company. So Korach rebelled against Moses in the wilderness, and of course he and his faction were swallowed up by the earth. So the Midrash Shmuel points out, look at the wording of the Mishnah. When it comes to the dispute between Hillel and Shammai, the Mishnah mentions both sides, Hillel and Shammai. But when it comes to Korach's dispute, it doesn't say the dispute between Korach and Moses. It doesn't mention both sides because we don't dignify them both as equal, as if there's an equal dispute between Korach and Moses. God forbid. It was Korach's dispute. We don't even bring Moses and Aaron and God into the wording. The dispute that Korach and his faction illegitimately started, and we just mentioned them. So very subtle aspect of the wording. That's another indication that it's not a good dispute, that it was just for their ego. Okay, so one modern day counterpoint you could think of is, let's say, the dispute in every healthy society, at least every healthy democracy, has a center right party, a conservative party, and a center left party, the progressive party. And that dispute has never been resolved. Who has the right view of the world, conservatives or progressives? And to be rabbinic, they both make good points. That's why every election, sometimes the conservative will be elected, and then a few years later the liberal will be elected, and so it goes and so it goes. And presumably both sides, have the best interest of society in mind. We're talking about in general, right? A lot of politicians are corrupt, but both sides mean well, and that dispute just endures forever because there's some things that we ought to conserve in society and not change too quickly because change can be disruptive. And there are other things that progressives are correct, that things have to be torn down and changed sometimes, and the dispute just goes on without any resolution. But if you look at the extreme right and the extreme left, fascism on the one hand and communism on the other, well, both of those ideologies have been thoroughly discredited by the 20th century. Nobody can seriously be a fascist anymore. No one can seriously be a totalitarian communist anymore. So that dispute does not endure anymore. They've both been proven wrong, by history. So that's probably a perfect modern day example. Furthermore, the commentary of the Noam Elimelech points out that what's a telltale sign that a particular disputant is only in it for their own ego? Look at the wording. Machlokas Korach v'chol adaso, the dispute of Korach and his company, that can be read to mean Korach and his own company were disputing amongst each other. And that's a telltale sign, when you have a group of criminals and they double cross each other, they're only in it for, each one is in it for their own ego. They're not really united even amongst themselves. And that's a telltale sign that the dispute is wrong because Korach had this unruly faction of 250 men and they were all in it for their own subjective purposes. And in the end, that alliance didn't really last. You could look at, let's say, going back to fascism and communism, the Hitler-Stalin pact, which was obviously very tenuous and then didn't last long at all. Okay, so with that, we will say the El Maleh Rachamim. Once again, for those who have yard site for both today and tonight, the 12th and 13th of Av. El Maleh Rachamim Shochen Bamirom Imamitzei Menucha Nechon Al Kanfei HaShechina B'malos Kedoshim B'Tahorim Kizor Harakia Masirim Es Nishmos Kalaskaros Shalayom B'Shal Halayla Shal Chuli Olamam Ba'avur Shemispalim Bad Haskaras Nishmasam Began Eden Tehe Menuchasam Lachain Bal Harachamim Yastireim B'Seser Kenafav Liolamim Yitzror B'Tzorachayim Es Nishmasam Adonai Unachlasam Yanuchu B'Shalom Mishkvasam Benomar Amen. And in English, O God, full of mercy, who dwells on high, grant proper rest on the wings of the divine presence, in the lofty levels of the holy and pure, who shine like the glow of the firmament, for the souls of Irving Bernstein, Max Berg, Lawrence Klutz, Yetta Goldstein, Lyubov Kapustin, whose yard sites are today, and Stanley Barish, Charles Gersh, Joseph Haith, Joseph Kars, Sarah Levy, and Ruth Unger, whose yard sites begin tonight, in whose memory we study and pray. May their resting place be in the Garden of Eden. Therefore, may the Master of Mercy shelter them in the shelter of his wings for eternity. May he bind their soul in the bond of life. Hashem is their heritage. May they rest in peace. And let us say Amen.